Hello and welcome everybody to round two of the Arcane Series. Round two is about to begin underway here. We've got the players shuffling up and getting their hands and mulligans resolved. This pod is sure to be an interesting pod with a Sisay, Kinnan and Rograkh. Don't forget to follow us on all the different social media networks. We are on either Combat Step or Combat Step MTG on those different networks. So go ahead and follow us, give us a subscribe if you're on. Looks like we also have a Tymna Kraum player here in seat one. And you can see that our players are also resolving their mulligans with some of our anti-cheating measures where they do the Brazilian cut. They put their decks in three piles and one of the opponents chooses the order of that. That is one of our anti-cheating measures that we have in place to make sure that the integrity of event is in place and the event is ultimately enjoyable for everybody that is attending. Looks like we got Jamaican dude over here who has resolved their mulligans and is ready to begin on their Rograkh Thrasios deck. If you were not able to attend this month's event, we run monthly cEDH Webcam tournaments. You can find those on topdeck.gg. We do have one next month on a Saturday that is a paid event. We can only do these things with you. Without you playing and supporting us, these events don't happen, and we are very much appreciative of our players and everybody who is supporting these events because truly can't happen if we don't have the players to play in them. Looks like the pod is almost done resolving their mulligans, with seat 3 being the last to resolve their mulligans so that they can get underway here with their round 2 match. Looks like all players have resolved their mulligans, but the pod is awaiting to start. Doesn't look like there are any pregame actions. Mr. Daddy draws a card for their turn, and they're going to play a turn 1 Underground Sea into a Jewel Lotus. We may see a turn 1 Commander here, or nope, we're going to pass the turn and wait. Leading it on to seat 2 here with Sisay into a land and a Lotus Petal, and they're immediately going to crack their petal and get out a Spell Seeker and a Ragavan. Notably, Ragavan was not dashed out, so it will not be attacking this turn, but next turn that monkey can swing in and steal somebody's plunder. Seat 2 follows up with Seat 3 follows up with a Lotus Petal and a Treasure Vault, which is a great land in a Kinnan deck, especially when you make some mana, crack and make a bunch of treasures with your Kinnan on the field. Treasure Vault just becomes a very key piece, and they're also going to pop into a Birds of Paradise here, so some nice mana off the get-go from the Kinnan player into a Mana Crypt, and then a Mirage Mirror, which is another great piece in Kinnan that can become a copy of several things that are on the board. Kinnan's off to a rather strong start. And then Jamaican dude's turn here. Seat 4 is off to a guard draw into a land. And of course, they're going to play their own commander and go fetch. Of course, they're fetching up a volcanic island there, doing a quick shuffle of their deck. And then we are back on to seat 1. They played a Misty Rainforest for turn, and they are also fetching up a volcanic island themselves. We do have Kraum mana here, as well as potentially we have enough mana to get out our Tymna. So let's see if seat 1 is going to deploy one of their 2 commanders. Kraum might be better earlier so that we have some easy connecting if they're trying to get in some damage. Tymna can't attack this turn, but could yield card draw over the next couple turns. And you can see both players presenting their decks to be cut. And the additional measure is after your deck has been cut, an opponent chooses a number between 9 and 20, and that many cards go on the bottom after the deck has been cut. This is another nice measure that's in place to help prevent people from manipulating the top of their library here. And then looks like we got seat 1 who's deploying their Kraum. Will they go to combat or pass the turn here? And it looks like we did not go to combat. We left our Kraum back, and we passed it on over to seat 2, who also played their Misty Rainforest and is cracking that to go get some land out of their deck here. Not a bad start for all of these players for a turn 1 or turn 2. Everybody's just moving along. Looking like we're fetching up a Bayou here from seat 2 off their Misty Rainforest. Looks like all players left to open up blockers so that potentially the Sisay player here is not going to swing in into somebody and get a free card off that Raggy. And a treasure, notably, too. They do not want to give players extra mana or extra cards. We are going to take a chance and swing with that Ragavan. Is somebody going to let it through or take a block? And we are swinging in at seat number 3 there with the Raggy. It was not blocked, and they got a Beseiju off the top of their deck as well as a treasure. Beseiju, not a great hit, not really something that they're going to be able to do anything with, so that is not bad. It does stink to lose your Beseiju, as it is a land and some free interaction, but it isn't the worst that could happen, especially in Kinnan. At least it wasn't one of the combo pieces. There's nothing worse than your Raggy taking someone else's combo. And we are passing the turn over here to our seat 3 Kinnan player here, who's got a roll for their mana crypt. Fortunately, the odds were not in their favor today, and they lost the mana crypt roll and took some damage off that. Drawing their card for turn. Do we see a Kinnan deployed here, which would put the Kinnan player in a significant advantage with the mana that they do have? They would have Kinnan mana here to do some activations of the Kinnan. And yep, we do see a Kinnan here. Next turn, they'll be able to start ripping some cards with that Kinnan and potentially just going balls to the walls crazy. Kinnan is one of those decks that out of nowhere just starts ripping some big old nasty creatures that make the table have to either answer it right now and deal with that problem, or start shutting the table down when you rip into things like a Void Winnower or other creatures that just ultimately the table finds to be very difficult to deal with. Having that Mirage Mirror out as well is also very potent for a Kinnan. They are going to be sitting pretty next turn. And Jamaican Dude is playing a Blue Delta and going to go fetch with that. Looks like we're maybe doing a little bit of a shortcut as well after that. Just furthering our mana sources here from Jamaican Dude, who deployed an Arcane Signet. Sitting back and riding the train, hopefully not doing too much and making yourself too much of a target early game. And passing the turn on over back to seat 1 here. Seat 1 deploying a nice little mana rock there, their Soul Ring, continuing to keep up the pace with the table, and passing it on over here to seat number 2, the Sisay player. Do we see a Sisay deployed this turn, or are we going to pass it up and continue to take our nice and slow here? And we're swinging our Ragavan this turn again, seeing if we can get some additional value or some cards out of that. And yet again, our Ragavan goes into the Kinnan player and is not blocked. They are getting a land off of the Ragavan again. Another land, this time it's Cephalid Colosseum, which in Kinnan, that is a combo piece. One of the many pieces in Kinnan that could go for infinite and allow you to machine gun the table here. So that does hurt just a little bit. That potentially that piece is now not in play. Looks like we're doing a little thinking and into the think tank here. We want to do anything else on the Sisay turn before we ship it on over to a big turn of Kinnan possibly. And we are passing it on over to Kinnan. Let's see if the odds are in their favor today. Do they take 3 or are they safe? On the odds were in their favor. No damage for the Kinnan player. Kinnan is into the think tank here. They could potentially be pondering whether they just pass the turn and hold up the mana to do some Kinnan flips or deploy some other big threat. Typically, Kinnan is going to just dump Mana Rock after Mana Rock and wait till someone else's turn to try to interact. Unless they have a big creature in hand that they're ready to deploy, like a Nezahal, you usually just wait and see what happens and interact with other pieces on the table. Looks like we are tapping and making our Mirage Mirror become a copy of something. Checking for responses around the table to make sure no one wants to do any kind of interaction and shenanigans, and it looks like the table is discussing a little bit of what that could be. So there could be potential interaction in hand. Maybe a way to remove the Kinnan. Doing some calculation on the Kinnan player side here. It's always scary when a Kinnan player is having to count. That tells you something big maybe coming out of their hand here, and usually when it does, it impacts the board in a pretty heavy way. Kinnan typically does not play tiny little creatures and pass the turn when you're counting like that. Usually you're debating, but they aren't casting anything. They're passing the turn on over to seat 4. Quite interestingly. Was expecting a little bit more from the Kinnan player there that turn. Looks like we've got an imposter mech being deployed on seat 4 side here. Very nice card to have deployed. Coming in and copying something is always great. Let your opponents play their things and you get to play with their nice toys too. And then we are deploying our Thrasios from seat 4 here. Looks like seat 1 is taking some notes, which notably you are allowed to do in tournaments. You are allowed to take notes and use them if you write them down yourself. It's always helpful to keep track of information and pay attention to what's going on. Playing the new Dauntless creature here, which is pretty good for the table. It is going to shut off a little bit of things from the table and slow things down just a tad. Dauntless Dismantler is a great card, one of our newest additions that we've got. This one came out of Ixalan, so it's not too old, but it is slowly beginning to make its way into cEDH, as it does have some pretty significant value as a stacks piece. Passing the turn on over here to seat number 2 with their Sisay deck. They are playing a City of Brass as a land for turn. Still no Sisay yet, but we do have a wide range of colors already on the battlefield and the mana for Sisay to be able to start doing the Sisay pieces. They may just be playing it and holding it back. They don't want to lose their Sisay too early and then not be able to do much of anything. It looks like we're going to continue with those Ragavan swings and have that monkey continue to pilfer our stuff from other players here. Is the Ragavan finally going to be dealt with, or is it going to go through? And it looks like the Raggy goes through and continues to punch the Kinnan player. And it went through. Kinnan reveals a card, makes a treasure. Doing some digging over here from seat number 2. All players are in a pretty good position early game, though, notably. No one's emerged quite as the significant threat just yet, but all players are kind of keeping pace. They are deploying mana rocks. They are deploying things that impact the game, which is always nice to see. You want to see the players all kind of contributing and developing their board states. It's never a fun match when you see a player who is just hard-pressed to do anything that turn and then continues to pass turn after turn after turn. It also impacts the game when those kind of things happen as well, because now you have a player who is not able to contribute and deal with threats as equally. Also, then you have one less threat at the table. And right now we are seeing all players just continue to develop a healthy board state. Don't forget, if you are watching, on your screen there is a link to donate to the Wounded Warrior Project. So feel free to donate to the charity. It supports a great cause and supports some of our veterans. Also, don't forget to follow us on all the different social media networks. We are on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads as Combat Step MTG. And then we are on YouTube, Twitter/X, and Twitch as Combat Step. So whatever social media platform you are on, chances are we are there too. So follow us, subscribe to us, and be sure to check out all of our content. We do stream weekly on our Twitch channel, various games ranging from mid-power all the way to cEDH. And we also then post our content weekly onto YouTube. So if you are subscribed to our YouTube channel, you will not miss any of our upcoming content each week that we release it. And seat 2 here has tutored for a card, and that card is now on top of their library. They are in a great position here that they could tutor for a very impactful card and potentially do some significant damage to the table. They have Cyclonic Rift mana. They have ways to do things next turn. And we are seeing our Sisay being deployed here. And they are set up to be in a great position with Sisay. This may be the point in which seat 2 here begins to creep ahead and begins to start to develop as a little bit of a threat We are moving on over here to the Kinnan player's turn. They are also set up in a great position to begin activating Kinnan and getting some pretty significant on the battlefield and threats that are hard to interact because notably you cannot interact with the creature coming in off Kinnan. You can interact with the activation, but once the card has been revealed and is on the battlefield, it is there immediately, and there's no other point in which you get to interact once that card is revealed until something else happens and priority passes, which is what makes Kinnan a very significant threat because it can drop something disgusting at the turn of a dime, making it more challenging for the table to then interact in future turns. Kinnan is my first personal favorite deck that I run in tournaments, and when I drop things like the Void Winnower, the table just goes absolutely bonkers trying to find a way to deal with it, and at that point, usually I begin to run away with the game because each subsequent turn is just another big old fatty hitting the table. We are moving on over here to seat number 4, Jamaican dude, aka Ashani from the former Playing with Power. They have deployed their Thrasios, and they already deployed their Rograkh once this game. They're just playing a land and passing the turn here on over back to seat number 1, Tymna Kraum. Nothing too scary going on over there with seat 4 at the moment, but they do have the Thrasios mana, which is nice on somebody's end step. They can do the Thrasios activation, potentially rip a land, and continue to advance their board state just slightly. We are seeing seat number 1 here deploy their Wishclaw Talisman, which is great. Typically, we want to deploy a Wishclaw Talisman and go ahead and begin to get a threat and make the table continue to answer questions that we are asking of them. They are immediately going to go ahead and activate their Wishclaw Talisman and tutor up a card to their hand. Passing the Wishclaw on over to seat number 4 here. Seat number 1 dropping their Dockside here, which is going to get them pretty good amount of value from the table here. Likely they may have tutored for that Dockside. And continues to show you that Dockside is just absolutely format warping. You are seeing people play clones for the mere fact that they want to clone Docksides in the game. Before that, we did not see clones played very much. You might have seen a Phyrexian Metamorph in some decks, but now you are seeing a Phyrexian Metamorph, Phantasmal Image, Flesh Duplicate, many clones being played strictly because Dockside is that good, and Dockside is run in many decks. And you are likely to be able to clone your own Dockside or somebody else's as well. Notably, the land on the Kinnan player, the Treasure Vault, is an artifact land. Oh, and we are seeing them deploy their Aboleth Spawn, which is actually going to allow the Kinnan player to steal some mana here off of that. They are going to get some treasures as well. That was a great play from the Kinnan player and is going to set that Kinnan player up very far as they get many treasures off of this. Aboleth Spawn is a card that in Kinnan can really fly under the radar and then all of a sudden steal the show. We may see Kinnan here come far ahead next turn. Thank you to the Dockside. Looks like we had a little bit of a rewind happening, a different play. Table is going nuts over the Aboleth Spawn. They absolutely do not want Kinnan to have that mana. You never want the Kinnan player to pull far ahead like that because usually it is absolutely backbreaking, and Kinnan is going to abuse that. And the table is currently fighting over that right now, trying to figure out what's worse, a Dockside Extortionist on the Tymna Kraum side or all those treasures on the Kinnan side. And it looks like the Aboleth Spawn is not going to stick around. Dockside does resolve giving those treasures to the Tymna Kraum player, which is great for the table, keeping that Kinnan player from having a significant lead. Still a scary position for the table to be in as the seat 1 player here is making quite a bit of mana, but 7 mana is better on that side than the Kinnan. We are following that up with a Mox Opal, which is going to be turned online because of all those treasures they just made. Continuing to advance their board state here. And then we are going for the silence here, which that tells you folks that if they are trying to bait out a counter for the silence and or try to also go for the win here, that will tell the table whether or not there is any counter magic or any sort of interaction. And then we are likely to see seat 1 here try to go for it. Table is questioning whether or not that is going to resolve. Typically, silence is not played as just a value silence here, and then you're just going to play a couple mana rocks and pass. You would either hold up a card like silence for somebody else's turn and silence them to prevent them from going off, or you deploy it yourself and try to secure a win. You very seldom will see a silence played just to continue to play some mana rocks and move ahead. Table is still debating or not whether they want that to resolve, and it looks like the silence is going to resolve. Do we see Tymna Kraum here just go for it? And we are seeing here, after much debate and back and forth on the table, seat 4 decides to show that they have a counterspell and attempt to make an offer to the silence. And then we are seeing that followed up by a nice counter war here with a mental misstep on the offer you can't refuse. There was a lot of debate there over whether or not that should or should not be countered, but ultimately there was an attempt to counter it, followed up by a counter. If that silence resolves, it could be absolutely backbreaking and game over for the table. Table is checking their hands, seeing if there's any backup here, any way they can help each other out, protect the table. We are seeing a Mindbreak trap followed up from the seat 2 Sisay player here. Is there any other magic in their hand to stop this from? And we are getting a deflecting swat. Lots of interaction here. That tells you if they want this to resolve, they must be in a game-winning position. They are not going to fight this hard over a silence if it was a value silence. They want that silence to resolve. Kinnan here is going to chime in with a good old mana drain, attempting to stop that silence. This is quite the counter war and interaction war here we have going on. People do not want the silence. We are resolving the SWAT and the mana drain, letting it go down to the Mindbreak trap, and then we are Flusterstorming the Mindbreak trap. A pretty smart move. Is there the Flusterstorm to the Flusterstorm? Boy, what a hand that seat 1 had here, just full of interaction. Looks like it is resolving. We are going back to the mental misstep, resolving that. Asking the table if there are any more responses. As we go down the stack, we are back to a mental misstep, countering an offer, countering the silence. The table is debating on what is happening next or what is going to happen. Looks like a lot of talk happening from seat 4, where they are now going to deploy a deflecting SWAT of their own, likely going to redirect that mental misstep to the silence, countering the entire piece here. Nice move with the deflecting SWAT. Is it enough, though? The table has exhausted an exorbitant amount of interaction to try to stop the silence, which is great, but did you stop what comes next? Do you have an answer? We have seen many counter spells and redirection spells. The table may have just been baited out with a silence here, and the win may still happen. We are diabolic, intenting, sacrificing our dockside, which at this point has done its job, going and getting a creature out of our deck. Table is letting that resolve, and normally you do let the tutor resolve and then you attempt to interact with what's coming next. In this case, I don't know if what's coming next is going to be something that the table can interact with. This may just be GG's here, and we may see the Tymna Kraum player move on up into the brackets. This is a long, hard match here. Lots of interaction has been played. We are continuing to move ahead with our turn. In seat 1, they just fetched and got a land out of their deck. They still have a couple cards in hand, and they still have several treasures that they can use here. looks like we are also going to continue tutoring away and getting pieces out of our deck. They're going to go for an enlightened tutor here, grabbing some other piece out of their deck. There's our Underworld Breach, which that's not great for the table. They have got tons of counters in the bin. They've got the Dockside in the bin. If the table does not have any further answers here, that is not good. They did exhaust tons of their resources. Underworld Breach is on top of their library. Do they have a way to draw it and deploy the Underworld Breach? And then there we do. There is a wheel. They're going to get that Underworld Breach as well as whatever other cards. This could be good for the table, though, here, because if the table has displayed that they have no interaction and can't stop this, you are wheeling 3 players into interaction. And it looks like Jamaican dude here has been holding a Spell Pierce, attempting to stop that wheel. They do not have the mana to pay for it. So the next best thing is deploy that Esper Sentinel and draw it. This is also good for Seat 1's position here, because we now know that not only is the table not wheeling, they're going to be relying on top decking from here. They are in a position to go around the table, draw a couple cards off their own Kraum and their Esper Sentinel when the table is playing things. And as long as they make it back to their turn, they are going to be in a position to potentially close out this game, knowing that the table does not have interaction or very little interaction in their own hands. If you watch the table closely while you're playing, it is super important to do that, because they will let you know what things they have available without even saying it. Priority passed all the way to Jamaican dude on that Wheel of Fortune, which tells you that likely Seat 2 and Seat 3 did not have any interaction, and we are scooping it up because it sounds like the table doesn't have anything else. And they are aware that they are on a clock. If there is no further interaction, that is the game. And so we have a winner here. Be sure to follow us on all of our social media networks. We are at Combat Step MTG on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads, and Combat Step on YouTube, Twitter X, and Twitch. Subscribe to our channels, give us a follow on all the different pieces. Join our Discord, where you will see games played frequently. And of course, we do run these tournaments every single month. This is our first tournament on a Sunday. We are likely to continue running our Sunday tournaments, but we can't do these things without you, the players. So please show support by subscribing, by following, by playing in our events. We are going to take a short intermission here while the rest of the pods finish up, and we will be back. So in that intermission, that's a great time to check out our channel and watch some of our content. We'll be back in a little bit for round 3 of the Arcane Series tournament.